the important thing to keep in mind here is that this pilot focuses on flying the plane as well as troubleshooting the emergency, because what you can get into is spending so much time trying to get that darn gear to stick down that you're not paying attention to flying. You can lose your airspeed, not be going fast enough. There are a lot of, you can stray into something. So we hope, and it appears, that this pilot has been maintaining good control of the aircraft while troubleshooting this problem.
And speaking of that gear, the FAA is officially telling us here at Fox 26 what you and Dr. Jim have, correctly assumed, that there is a problem with the nose gear. So that is the official word from the FAA as we are keeping an eye on this. If you're just joining us now and you're looking at these live pictures, this is from Hooks Airport. We are looking at a single-engine Cessna plane that's having some issues with its nose gear, and they've declared an emergency landing attempt. Is that the right terminology, Don?
It is an emergency landing, sure.
What kind of speeds? It's so hard to tell when you're watching this on camera. What kind of speeds can we look at?
A plane like this doesn't fly incredibly fast in the world of airplanes. We're talking maybe 120 to 140 knots when they're out cruising. You're flying much slower when you're coming in to land. I believe generally under 100 knots, but it's been several years since I've flown a Cessna, so I can't give you the proper approach speed on it. But we're not talking about jet speed. We're talking about surprisingly slow speeds.
He's making an approach,
and when it certainly looks like it.
Dr. Jim says he's making. Okay, so how do you know that? What does that mean? He's getting ready to try another landing.
He's either going to try and bounce the landing gear another time, or he's going to come in for a landing. We don't really know, and so we're kind of watching along
All right, let's
with him.
watch.
He's going to try to go as slow as he possibly can at this point, and I've seen him do this a couple of times already, so we'll see what happens.
If he has a headwind, which you always want as a pilot, let's say it's a 20-mile-an-hour wind and you're flying 100 miles an hour. Well, now your speed over the ground is only 80 miles an hour, right? Because the headwind subtracts from your actual speed over the ground, because what you're paying attention to most of the time is your airspeed, which is a term you hear all the time. And so the stronger the headwind, if you're flying and landing into the wind, the slower you're actually moving over the ground when you reach that runway. So they could come down at a very slow apparent speed, maybe something that looks like 60 miles an hour or so when they reach the runway. Now they look high if they're going to the runway there. We don't know.
Hooks has a rather long runway though, so he could come in rather late, but you're right. Maybe someone's even taking a look, but it looks like he's going to touch down.
And it looks like he's right into the wind based on that windsock, that it is a headwind.
Okay. All right.
He landed.
That is one heck of a bounce,
There
but
you
he's
go.
still there.
Yeah.
I would consider
that worked out well. Now you
that's
can
a good
see
landing,
them
right?
immediately getting out of the plane, because
Okay.
they don't want to stay in that aircraft. They will have done an emergency shutdown, which is basically to turn off the battery, to turn off the fuel, to make everything stop moving in that plane, to limit the damage and limit the risk for fire.
And they are moving very quickly away from that plane right now.
Right.
The two passengers, and okay, we've lost the shot.
It's
right
a
there.
cliche to say any landing that you walk away from is a good landing, but obviously that's why that term
We see the
is there,
emergency
because
vehicles there, prepared, ready to go.
so now it's a question of insurance and mechanical damage, right? Because the people, if they suffered any injuries from that, would appear to be minor. They'll obviously be checked out there, but we're able to walk away from that. And then it's just a question of how much damage was caused to the plane.
Well, I must say, not being a professional pilot or having any aviation experience, that was a pretty good landing for an emergency. I don't know what it was like from your perspective, Don and Dr. Jim, but to watch this live and so many people talking about this on Twitter, being concerned about those people on board, it looks like it all worked out well.
They came down right in the runway. They kept the directional control once they hit the ground, and it didn't impact with too much force. I can tell you from having to make a couple of emergency landings in helicopters, even when it looks smooth and controlled, when you've declared an emergency as a pilot and you're putting something on the ground and there's something wrong with it, that is a big adrenaline dump in your body. You are working at about 100% of all of your capacity to try to get the thing down, to limit the damage, to hopefully not get anyone hurt and walk away from it, which they certainly did.
Is there a name for this technique or this approach that was used to land the plane the way that it was landed? Or did it just make it on the ground?
I have to confess, I don't know what you would call that in the world of the fixed wing to land with your nose gear up, except a partial gear landing, which is what they've done. I had the fortunate thing being a helicopter pilot with skids that we didn't often have to worry about landing gear because the landing gear is down all the time because you're putting it down on skids. But we can see the emergency workers there moving toward the vehicle. No indication of any flames, no smoke coming from there. So again, that emergency shutdown is an important part of that. It basically stops the fuel flow, gets the engine shut off, and so you don't have avgas moving around.
Again, if you're just joining us, you're looking at live pictures at Hooks Airport, where we are happy to report there has been a successful emergency landing here this afternoon, about a minute or so ago. We believe there were 2 people on board this single-engine Cessna, and we watched a couple of attempts at a landing, and I believe it was the 3rd try. That was definitely the charm.
Yeah, they just decided that they weren't going to get that nose gear down, so to go ahead and do it and deal with the consequences. You saw, as soon as that nose comes down, it forces the propeller to stop. That's a sudden stoppage, which isn't great for the engine. It certainly ruins the propeller and it causes some damage to the outer skin of the airplane. But in all likelihood, that plane, from what I saw, will fly again at some point in the future.
All right, as we continue to look at these live pictures right now provided to us from Skyfox, as Don mentioned, the emergency vehicles are on the scene. You assume at this point that the people on board the plane are being checked out. Good signs, meaning good sign because there's no fire,
Sure.
no flames anywhere. That's definitely a good image that we're looking at here on the runway right now.
They probably decided to do this when they did because losing daylight, it's much easier to land any aircraft during the day than at night, and we can see it's getting dark there. So even though they probably had more fuel that they could have burned off, they made the decision to go ahead and put the plane down and do it while they had good visibility and could see what they were doing. And again, we'll wait for a report from the FAA and the airport about the condition of the people on the plane, but it appears that they walked away unharmed from what was a very dramatic situation this afternoon.